We've been in this series on walking in the ways of God and how absolutely vital it is for us to be those who walk in his ways. And that one of the number one commandments of the Lord, we see in the Old Testament, God said, I want you to love me, to obey me, to trust me, and to walk in my ways. And we began to see how one of God's number one complaints was that though he had a people whom he had been loving and brought great deliverance to and gave them incredible promises, they never learned his ways. And therefore, because of that, they could not enter into what he had for them, and that they even suffered destruction. So walking in his ways is absolutely vital. And what I've been saying to you over these many weeks is that this is, if you want to define the Christian life, this is one of the ways that you can define it, is that we are learning to know our God, we're learning to know his heart, and we're learning to cause our ways to be his ways. His ways to be our ways, not vice versa. We do that to him a lot. God, you got to do it my way. It's the only thing that makes sense. All right. So last week we looked at 1 Corinthians 10. I just want to take just a little hop right here, look at this, and then we're going to go back to Hebrews 3, and then we're going to go to Numbers chapter 20. Can you move that fast?
Yep.
Paul says to the Corinthian church, in 1 Corinthians 10, for I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. Now, let me just stop there and make this quick little point. He's talking to Gentiles here, and he's referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the elders of Israel as their fathers, their spiritual fathers. Isn't that interesting? Though they are Gentiles. And so if that's true about the Corinthian church, it's also true of us. They are our fathers in the Spirit. And the promises that were given to Abraham and the covenant given to him is now ours. And so that's why we need to pay very special attention to the things in the Old Testament. They were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. And again, he's referring to when Moses came and brought them up out of Egypt and bringing them through the Red Sea and on the way into the Promised Land. It says in verse 2, they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them. Now, when he talks about this, what is he making reference to? He's referring to when they, which we began to look at last week, Meribah, where the cloud of God's glory had stopped and rested in an area where there was no water. And there it says they were thirsting, and they began to grumble and complain, and God wasn't moving on from there. And so we looked at the story last week at how God told Moses to strike the rock, and water came forth, and they all drank. And now here, Paul is telling us that rock was actually Jesus Christ himself. Isn't that something? But they didn't know it. But you and I do. I love the fact that God, how many of you know, God knows what he's doing? It's taken me a long time to figure that out. I mean, I know it in my head, but I don't trust it in my heart. So here they were thirsting. They had no idea. Oh, there's a rock right over there. His name is Jesus. Before they even knew him, he was there in their midst. And he was the very rock that Moses was going to strike, and the water was going to come forth, and they were going to drink from him. Because, see, this isn't just about water. This is about your spiritual life. It's always about your spiritual life. Any physical battles that we're going through, any of our circumstances, if you get wrapped up in the physical realities of what you're dealing with, your physical needs, you're going to miss the greatest thing that's happening that God is doing, which is spiritual. I hope you understood what I just said. It's always about the spiritual. So if you find yourself in the middle of a struggle in the physical, don't get hung up in the weeds. Immediately move to say, oh, no, there's a rock around here somewhere. His name is Jesus. God is doing something, and it's spiritual, and I don't want to waste this moment. So it says, they all drank from a spiritual rock, which followed them. The rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. And then Paul goes on to tell the Corinthians, he said, all these things have been written down carefully for us as examples so that we would learn from them and not make the same mistakes. Now, I want you to go to Hebrews 3, because the writer of Hebrews, which many believe was the Apostle Paul, it doesn't say who the writer was, but the writer of Hebrews picks up this same theme in chapter 3, where he says, he begins to talk about the Israelites and Moses being a faithful servant and all that they were experiencing there. In verse 7 it says, therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, and again, this is a quote from Psalm 95. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they do not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Okay, in this place that he's referring to, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. You go to Psalm 95, and it says, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me in Meribah and Massah. So verse 12, take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Evil and unbelieving are put together in the same sentence there. Take note. Something about unbelieving. Now notice that unbelieving here is a verb. It's also an adverb describing the heart. And because belief and unbelief is a choice, it is an action that resides within us. It's very important to note that. So that means you and I have the capacity and the choice at all times to be believing or unbelieving towards the Lord, no matter what we're going through. You're all happy about that, right? Said, thank you, Paul, you just saved my life. Make sure, brethren, that means within the context of the whole church together as a family here, we take care, and we take care of one another, so that there not be an evil and unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Falling away, a lot of times we think, well, that he's just referring to you just gave up on the Lord altogether and you didn't renounce Jesus and you're off doing other things. And that's not what he's talking about. You're either moving with God in his ways, and that's why talking about walking in his ways is so descriptive of our relationship with him. If you're walking in his ways, you're always moving and you're always moving forward. If you're not walking in his ways and you're just kind of there trying to be a believer or whatever, you're standing still, and just in your standing still, you're falling back because God's always moving forward. See, those who are led by the Spirit of God are sons and daughters of God. So if you're being led, you are always in motion towards responding towards God. Where is he going? What is he saying? What does he have on his agenda? How can I be like him? How can I carry forth his purposes in the earth? You're being led by the Spirit, so you're always moving forward. When you decide, and primarily from unbelief, to just camp out and just say, well, I'm just kind of tired, or I'm just kind of disappointed, or I'm not sure that this is really worth it, or, well, I'm even kind of angry at God right now, or whatever excuses that we come up with. And how many know we got a boatload of them? And as soon as you run out, Satan will give you more. We stop in our tracks, and as soon as we stop, for whatever reason, we're falling back. We're falling away. And something's actually happening to your heart that you don't even know is happening. But he says, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it's still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Okay, now I want to jump down to verse 16. For who provoked him, God, when they heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. Now, he just took us through a progression of something, and I don't know if you don't connect these dots, you're not going to see what he's actually saying. He's telling us, here's the Israelites, and they had all the promises, and they had all these experiences. They had experienced God's works for 40 years. Were they in good hands? Were they seeing God doing stuff? Oh yeah, unlike anybody had ever experienced before. They were experiencing the hand of God. He was in their midst. They're drinking from the rock. They're eating spiritual food, manna. And all these things are happening then day after day. And yet, at every critical point along the way, were they operating in belief and excitement and expectation and saying, can't wait to get into God's promise? Or were they in the middle of their test saying, if only we had stayed in Egypt? We'll get into more of that in a second here. So he says here, faith is the key to the ways of God, is what he's ultimately saying here. What you are believing about God, staying on top of what you are believing and making sure that you're choosing to always believe God's promise, always believe that he's good, always believe that he's with you, always believe that you are going somewhere good with him, that regardless of what's happening around you, you are believing something connected to who he is that determines how you're doing in the moment and whether you take the next step to move forward. Are you believing him? Because it says here, they were not able to enter into God's rest. And the land of Canaan was a picture of the rest of God, where all things were going to be supplied to them. Things were going to be given to them. I'm going to bring you into land flowing with milk and honey. It's the milk and honey's already there. You're just going to step into and experience it and partake in it. God always talked about houses you did not build, cities, city walls that you did not form, orchards that you did not plant. All of these things are going to be sitting there waiting for you. It's a picture of God's rest. How many think God has a rest for us right now in Jesus Christ? You see, we've been blessed with every spiritual blessing in heavenly places already. You can't earn it. You can't achieve it. You can only receive it. Seek first the kingdom of God and work really hard, and maybe God will come through for you. No, Jesus said, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added, given, handed over to you. You say, we still don't believe that. It's called unbelief. They could not enter in because of their unbelief. And yet, he says they were disobedient. See, faith is the key to walking in the ways of God. But if we do not believe God, our hearts become hard and we become disobedient. Let's just talk about that for a second. You are in the middle of whatever you're going through at the moment, and maybe it's taking a long time. You're in the middle of a big, long thing, let's say. Yes, we're in the middle. Maybe you would call it your valley of the shadow of death, whatever. But you're in the middle of it. Here's the thing. If in the middle of your circumstances you lose sight of him and his goodness and his promise, and you begin to, you make a choice to stop believing, and you may say to me, oh, well, Paul, I never choose to stop believing. It just kind of happens to me. In fact, we do choose to stop believing. It may not be a conscious choice where you're saying, I'm just not going to believe God anymore. I don't believe a single thing he says. Now, some people do that, but most of us never do that. It's the unbelieving that comes on us, which it literally becomes a choice for us by default, because we do not keep choosing to believe what God has said, in spite of what's happening at the moment, in spite of how I feel. See, in this case of Meribah, they were thirsting. That's a very real difficulty. I mean, it was affecting their bodies. Everybody around them was complaining. Their own children may have been crying and calling out, Mom, Dad, where's the water? You know, you're watching your animals languishing for lack of water and maybe potentially getting ready to die. There's no water. And so you're going through this. And here's the point. If while you're going through the negative issues that are impacting you, body, soul, and spirit, if you do not maintain and guard your heart toward the Lord and maintain your outlook of faith of where we're going. So that was the problem for the disciples when they got into the boat. Why did they get into the boat? Because Jesus said, let's go to the other side. But when they're in the middle, on the way to the other side, a storm comes. Now, of course, Jesus is sleeping in the boat because he knows where they're going. But they lost sight of what Jesus said. We're going to the other side. And so they began to look at their circumstances, and fear overtook them, and they start screaming, and they're angry at Jesus, because he's sleeping. They wake him up and say, Lord, don't you care that we perish? Now, how many think they wanted to take those words back after he calmed the storm? What were they being overtaken by? Well, there was fear, and we want to cut them a lot of slack because we want to cut ourselves some slack, right? Say, well, yeah, if I were in their sandals, I might have been going to the exact same place. But when Jesus gets up and rebukes the storm, what is the first thing that he says to them? Oh, you of little faith, why were you unbelieving? Which tells us that in the middle of that whole situation, what was going to make the difference was believing God. Believing something related to God, to Jesus in the boat. thinking through some thoughts of belief, because belief and believing is what's going on between your ears and how it's touching the heart, and then letting the heart come up and inform what's going on between your ears. And you and I are in charge of that. Now, the Holy Spirit will help us. You're going to have angels come along and even whisper some things to you and say, hey, take this one. This will help you. Whatever. I mean, God is all around us trying to help us to believe. But we have to make the choice to grab a hold and do that. Now, here's where I'm going with this, is that when we stop being in the process, the active process of believing God in spite of what I see, because we walk by faith, not by sight. Are you connecting these dots? When I stop actively believing and instead I am reacting to what's happening around me, and then I let my thoughts of fear and past experiences and whatever else come up and start taking control of what's going on inside my heart, and the atmosphere inside of me becomes a storm. If I don't walk on that storm with Jesus, what happens is that unbelief starts to harden my heart. Without you even knowing it, your heart is getting hard, because you're now looking at your circumstances without God. And then if you have God in the picture, you're now actually blaming him and angry at him and just saying, where is he? What is he doing? Why isn't he here? Why isn't this getting any better? Can you relate to what I'm saying? You know, you guys could fill in the blank with your own stuff. But this is classic. And this is why these things are written down from cover to cover in your Bible, story after story about the people of God walking with him and how they were handling their circumstances and the people around them and the callings that God had put on their lives. All these stories are written down for us so that we can look at that and say, oh, I like what they did, and oh, I don't want to do that. I want to make a different choice. And so you and I are the ones who manage these things. But if we do not manage our believing God, and believing God means I am expecting him to be exactly who he says he is. Those who come to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek after him. So I am taking responsibility for my heart, for what I'm allowing to process between my ears. And by the way, if you find yourself going into a negative place, that's okay. Just recognize the moment that you're in and flip the switch. Your will has been given to you to flip a switch. You can stop your thoughts at any time. All you got to do is just blink your eyes. If I don't like the thoughts going through my head, I just blink my eyes. Very mechanical, but it works. That's a freebie. But you and I can take our thoughts captive and bring them into obedience. 2 Corinthians 10. We bring every thought, take every thought captive and bring them into obedience to Jesus. So I'm believing. I'm maintaining my belief. I'm going to make sure I'm always believing something wonderful about God, regardless of what I'm walking through. I began to start meditating on everything that he's done in the past. See, one of the gifts that God has given us is the works of God. And one of the things he says about the Israelites, he said, they saw my works for 40 years. And how many of you know they saw works that you and I have never seen? Way above and beyond. Displays of power and faithfulness and deliverance and a passionate love that God has for his people, that God displayed for the Israelites. And they were really messed up people, by the way. And yet he displayed his works to them for 40 years. And even after seeing him working day after day after day, they're grumbling, complaining, hardening their hearts, and then they become disobedient toward God. They were not able to enter in because of their unbelief. Now I want you to go to Numbers 20 with me. We're just going to take a quick little hop over there. Last week we looked at Exodus 17, which is the story of when the Israelites had not been very far along the way coming through the Red Sea, and they're on their way to Canaan. They've already experienced marvelous miracles, the bitter waters being turned sweet. They just finished doing the dance and song of Moses at the other side of the Red Sea, watching the Egyptian bodies floating out there, and the chariots were all gone. And all these amazing things happened, and they just got fed a catered quail dinner for millions, and manna has now begun to come every single day. They're being fed by the Lord every single day. They don't have to do one single thing to try and produce food. God's supplying the food. All they have to do is step outside of their tent and say, "Oh, thank you, Lord," and gather it up and prepare it. And if they were vegans, they just ate it raw. Sorry. I'm sure they had health classes on the best way to eat manna. It's right there in the Bible. They just... Okay. So we looked last week at how they came to this place. It had not yet been called Meribah. It was just in this wilderness area. They're without water. They grumble and complain. And here's what they were saying. Is God among us or not? Now, how many know God was really merciful? God heard what they were saying. They're grumbling at Moses, but they were also grumbling at God. They were grumbling indirectly. Have you ever grumbled at God indirectly? You're not actually just talking to him like, "God, are you among us?" Or no, they're just talking to each other and saying, "Well, I wonder if God is really among us or not." It's called safe complaining. So you can maintain your outward appearance of holiness, So God hears, but he doesn't react to what they're saying. But it's very clear from the Bible, they didn't pass the test. There was a test in this. And it's not necessarily that God himself was deliberately testing them, like, okay, I'm going to put them in this situation and just see what comes out of them. But life is just full of tests, period. You are going to have times in your life where there's just no water, figuratively speaking. It's just going to happen. This is the world that we're living in. But God didn't say, I'm going to deliver you out of everything. He said, I'm going to be with you through it. And in that, you're going to experience my glory. And so they begin to grumble and complain and say, is God among us or not? Now, what does that reveal? Let me say this, that whatever comes out of your mouth when you're grumbling and complaining reveals what's really in your heart, and it reveals what you are really believing. Wow. And I know because I have a wife who reflects back to me what she hears me saying. Didn't you know that's what spouses are for? To be a mirror, a reflection back, to tell you what you just said and how it sounds to them. And I've had times when I'll just say something and And Margie will say, oh, is that what you believe? Is that what you're expecting more of? Where's the couch? I'm sleeping in another. But in the moment that she says it to me, I realize, oh, is that what I believe? Is that what I want to be believing right now? Oh. And yet I said it. And I said it because it's actually what I'm believing. So that's when the gift of repentance is given to you by the Holy Spirit. It's not a time for you to beat yourself up. It's just a time for you to get, realize I could have had a V8. I wake up and smell the coffee. Just whatever it is that you got to do. It's that moment of awakening where you say, oh God, look what's in my heart. And out of the abundance of the heart, my mouth is speaking. So I take responsibility for what is coming out of my mouth and realize it's a reflection of what's in my heart and what I'm really believing, and understanding that what I am saying, I'm actually prophesying my future. Because you and I are exactly right now where we said we would be. Because we're always speaking. And so we become managers of the things that are in our heart and just say, what am I believing right now? What am I expecting from God? And then I have to take ownership of those things. And that if I need to change what I'm saying, I change what I'm saying. But Paul, you don't understand, when you're really that thirsty and everything is just coming apart, you no longer have a responsibility for how you're feeling and what you're saying. Is that true? No, because we have this thing called the will. And you have the Holy Spirit now, if you're a born-again believer in Christ. Now, Numbers 20. We're gonna wrap from here. 40 years later, the original group that did all that grumbling and complaining, they're all dead. They've all dropped over under the judgment of God, where God spoke to them because of the ultimate expression of unbelief when they sent in the spies to go into Canaan early on. When they had come out of Egypt, they sent in the 12 spies. You remember that story? And or Caleb and Joshua are part of the 12, and then 10 of them come back from that experience carrying the evidence of the very thing that God said was in the land waiting for them. And they said, yes, it is a land flowing with milk and honey, but. Now, as soon as you say but, there's your unbelief beginning to start to come out. And as they continue to speak and just say, but there's giants in the land, but there's fortified cities, but there's this and there's that. As you're speaking those things of unbelief, where you're allowing your circumstances to begin to tell you reality, your heart will begin to harden, where you begin to say, and if we go in there, we will be utterly destroyed. Our children will become the victims of all that's going on, and God should never have brought us to this point. We should have never left Egypt. Woe unto us. Let's appoint another leader to take us back. Now, at that point, their hearts had become hardened, and their unbelief got spread through the entire group. And everybody began to chant the same unbelief and the same grumbling, and they began to prophesy their own destruction. And so God came along and said, since you have prophesied that I am not with you, and that I'm not good, and that I'm not able to take you into this land and give it to you, and instead that your children are going to become victims of me, because I'm such a lousy God, then it's going to actually come upon you exactly what you said, except your children will go into the land, but you're not. Now that was a severe judgment. And they all dropped over for the next 40 years. God said, for the 40 days that the spies were in the land experiencing my goodness, each day is going to be a year for you, taking laps in the desert until every one of you are dead. But your children are going to go in. Oh, and by the way, Joshua and Caleb, they believed me with their whole heart, and they're going in. So here we are 40 years later. They have been doing this long lap through this entire area for 40 years. And lo and behold, they are back in the same spot where there's no water. And lo and behold, there is the same rock. So in Numbers 20, starting with verse 2, there was no water for the congregation. And they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. We're repeating history, aren't we? The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Do you know what they're saying? They're right back in the same place where now the elders, the current elders of Israel who saw water come out of that rock, are standing there and saying, if only we had been killed off by God the same way he judged the rest of our forefathers. Our fathers that dropped over in the wilderness. If only that God had done that to us, that would have been better than what we're about to go through here now. Woo. Strong words. They were literally cursing themselves. You ever done that? Probably, but you just don't know it yet. Because we're so unaware of the words that we're saying, we just say them and say, well, it doesn't matter what I say. If only we had perished. If only we had died when our parents died before the Lord. So they were saying that what happened to our parents over these last 40 years is a better outcome than what we have right now in our present moment. Be careful how you judge your circumstances. Be careful of the conclusions you come to. Why then, they're saying to Moses, why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Notice they're still saying we're the people of God. Now, I want you to get this. You can believe you are God's people, but not believe God. They're saying we're God's people, but God is absolutely powerless about what's going on here right now. And they're blaming Moses and saying, we're God's people, and you brought us out of Egypt to this point. Now, understand, they just ate manna that morning. Do you know that you and I could be partaking of the works and the blessings of God every single day and not have it change us in any way? That's scary. That's why Thanksgiving is so important. Praise is so important, because Thanksgiving and praise keeps you connected to the hand of God, the works of God that are in your life every single day. And it keeps your faith fresh, that you're going to see it again and again and again. Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness? For us to die here. So they've already made their conclusion. They've already interpreted their circumstances apart from God. Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. I don't have time to unpack that one. That one's a potent one. Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. See, the tent of meeting hadn't been there the first time they were in Meribah. Now the tent of meeting is there. It's in their midst. And the Israelites watched the glory of the Lord come on that tent over and over again. They would watch Moses and Joshua going in and Aaron going in and being with the Lord face to face. And tent of meeting is sitting there right now. It's all set up. And they're grumbling and complaining. So Moses does what any of us could do at any time. He goes to meet with God, to get into the presence of the Lord, to hear the word of the Lord. Because God has a greater word than our circumstances. God has something to say beyond what you and I feel in the moment. God has something he wants to reveal beyond what everybody else around us is saying. Even your family. Beware your family. They're more influential than you know. So they went into the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and then the glory of the Lord appeared to them. You see, God is faithful. He'll always come to us. He always has something that he wants to do and to say, even if it's just his presence. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod. Which rod is he talking about? Talking about the one that he received at the burning bush. He's talking about the rod that he struck the rock with the first time and water came out. And he's saying, now get that same rod. And you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. Now wait a minute. Whoa, wait. God, speak to the rock? You just told me to get the rod. Why am I not going to go do what I did last time? I'm going to take the rod and I'm going to go strike the rock. See, the rod, you and I can get our eyes focused on external things that represent God's power, when in fact, the power is within us. The authority isn't just in the rod, it's in me. Because when Moses speaks, he's speaking for the Lord. See, the rod is maybe just a way for me to try to do something to control my circumstances, to exert force, to try and get a breakthrough. When in fact, what you and I need to do is speak into the situation. See, God's doing something new with Moses that he's never done before. Moses is in the middle of a test as well. Moses, take the rod. And when I get to heaven, I want to ask Moses and the Lord about this. So what were you really after here? Because it doesn't tell us, but I've got some guesses. God will oftentimes set us up with things that we know and recognize where we've seen him come before. That rod represented all the works of God up until this point, because it had always been involved in the works of the Lord, the biggest ones. Get that rod, take it with you to the rock, and the people are all going to be looking and waiting for you to strike that rock, except you're going to speak this time instead of hit it. So Moses does. He gets the rod, he and Aaron, He says, thus you shall bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. Now, what does that tell us? Does God want them to be watered? Does God want to supply the water again? Even though they've been so disobedient and so hardened, and the Bible tells us for 40 years God was loathing these people because of their unbelief and because they didn't know his ways. And even now God is being merciful. Even now God is saying, I'm going to give them water. Because God is always trying to lead you and I, no matter what we're going through and no matter how poorly we have executed things up to this point with our own walk with God, God is wanting to give us another chance to believe, another chance to know his heart toward us. That gives me some hope. Go speak to the rock. Water's going to come forth that my people may drink. So it says Moses took the rod from before the Lord, and just as God commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, listen now, you rebels. Now, was that true what he was saying? Are they being rebellious? Yep, absolutely. But here's the deal. Moses himself is going to join their ranks through his judgment. Oh, God spoke to me this the other day. He said, every place you judge somebody, you're getting ready to join them. Every time you believe something, the worst about somebody else, you just cut yourself off from that possibility of the best coming in your life. See, God, our God is always believing something amazing, no matter what we've done up to that point. He doesn't give up. He doesn't give up. See, these are the very people, even though they're standing there saying these awful things and being rebellious and hard-hearted and slandering God, all the rest, God is still planning on taking this group in, amazingly enough. Of course, they don't know they're going to cross over and get circumcised before they enter in. Woo! That'll teach you to say bad things. Just kidding. You rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Moses is forgetting who he's representing. He's saying, shall we, I and Aaron, bring this water for you? See, even now, Moses' heart is getting hardened. Moses is entering into his own unbelief because he stopped believing what God believed about his people. And now he's judging them. He's angry at them. And now Moses is being set up for his own disobedience, because it says, then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth in abundance, and the people drank. I think it took 2 times, because the first time was disobedience and no water comes out. And that might have been a good time for Moses to stop and say, oh, that's right, Lord, you said to speak to the rock. But his heart has become so hardened now at this point that he just hits it again. Like, God, you're just going to have to do it my way. Did you get those words? You're going to do it my way. And God does it his way. He lets the water come forth. Verse 12, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me, oh, there's that word, because you've not believed me, to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Moses and Aaron are judged right there at the spot. And God says, you were going in, but now you're not going in. Why? You did not believe me. You caved in to unbelief. Therefore, you hardened your heart. Therefore, you were disobedient. You didn't do it my way, Moses. And since you didn't do it my way and allow me to be seen by the people as holy. See, here's what God wanted by speaking to the rock. He wanted to provide an opportunity for the people to repent. He wanted them to see how amazingly good God was and that he was faithful, and that they didn't even need to have the rod of Moses going into Israel. All they needed to know was the heart of God and his word, and just speak it. What you notice in Joshua chapter 1, when Joshua is getting ready to take the people, and God comes to Joshua and he says, do not let my word depart from your mouth. Because he's not going to go in with the rod of Moses. He's now going in with the very word of the Lord. And he says, then you will have success. These were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. Faith is so important to the ways of God. You and I will never walk in the ways of God without faith, without believing God. We must walk by faith, not by sight. Is it possible that the Israelites could have, at that very moment when there was no water and they saw that rock again, that they would have said, you know what? We've been here before. We're not going to die of thirst here. Our God has been faithful. We just had manna for breakfast this morning. Tent of meeting is right there. Clouds, right? Wow. God has done every single thing that he said he's going to do. We're this close to going in. And you see, God had already said it was going to be 40 years. And if they had been looking at the calendar, they would have said, we are right on time for crossing over. But we just got this one little test here before we go in. And we're going to believe God. We're going to pass this test. Our forefathers didn't pass the test, but we're going to pass the test. And there's the rock, and it's even got that little split in it. Wow, what do you think God's going to do this time? I don't know. Let's begin to praise him. Let's begin to thank him. Let's begin to declare what he did before when he brought forth water from the rock. Let's sing a new song to the Lord. Let's dance. Let's do the Shigionoth. It's at the end of Habakkuk. God didn't bring us this far to bring us this far. We're not going to make the mistakes our parents made. Victory is just ahead. Our God is faithful. He loves us. The best is yet to come. They could have begun to prophesy. They could have begun to sing a new song about the land flowing with milk and honey. So I can taste the milk right now. The honey is sweet. Honey from the rock. Wow. Are you getting the picture? They had a choice. And then Moses himself got swept up into their saying, that whole big mess. And now they're going forward without Moses. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as they did at Meribah in the day that they tested the Lord. Let there not be an unbelieving heart, but let us walk in his ways. Let us be believing God with everything that we have. so that we do not err in our hearts, and that it would not be said of us, they never knew him and they never knew his ways. I think Jesus is coming back for a people whose hearts are fully his and they walk in his ways. It's my intention to be among them. How about you? Okay. Lord, we just bring this to you now. I just believe your Spirit's been here, just doing some surgery in our hearts right now. Lord, in any way that you've been exposing any unbelief in us, Lord, we just want to repent right now. We want to respond to you. But Lord, most of all, we want to be determined to manage our believing. To have faith, to trust you with everything we got. And whatever you may be in the middle of right now, in your circumstance, you've got to drive a stake into the ground right now and say, in this place, not down the road, but in this place, I will believe my God. In this place, I will declare his praise. In this place, I will declare the victory of the Lord. In this place, I am going to be found trusting my God with everything I have. So change your prayers from, oh God, get me out of this place. And move it over to, now Lord, let me see your glory. Let me see your holiness, that I might believe you all the more. I believe that I receive every promise.